These are my Camponotus ligniperdus ants, and I built them this beautiful forest vivarium out of this glass box. In this video, I'll show you how I did it, if they accept their new home, and what's so special about this acorn right here. Enjoy the video. It's finally warm and a wonderful day for a trip to the forest. It's good for the soul, but I'm also here for the ants. And it didn't take long to find some. These wood ants had captured a beetle and were making short work of it. Ants this size can apparently overpower giant beetles with ease. Does anyone know what kind of beetle this is? The ants' trails crossed the forest path, and I can't imagine any insect in their way surviving their omnipresence. It also didn't take long for me to find the source. Right next to the path, I found their anthill. I approached it carefully, keeping a respectful distance so as not to step on any ants or damaging their nest. And their nest is more than impressive. My phone camera is reaching its limits, but I got a better view of them on a tree trunk nearby. They march tirelessly up and down. Only they know what's up there. Perhaps aphids, which secrete sweet honeydew, but it remains a mystery to us. And as I watched the ants, an idea for a vivarium came to me. One for ants that love the forest and wood. I continued to observe nature, shaping the idea in my mind until I was ready. Inspired by the many anthills along the path, I headed home and started the project. We start with a glass tank measuring 20 x 20 x 20 centimeters. To move it around easily, we'll attach felt pads to the corners. This also protects the glass and reduces vibration that could disturb the ants. Next, we'll use expanded clay pebbles. This material is absorbent and will form the bottom layer. If we add too much water, the clay will absorb the excess and release it slowly over time. There are alternatives, but the color of the clay fits the forest theme perfectly. Next, we cut a drainage fleece to size. This will prevent the soil from mixing with the clay and becoming waterlogged. Too much moisture can lead to root rot in our plants, for example. Of course, I'll link all the materials I'm using in the description. And that brings me to our hardscape. A stick, or rather a branch. This one has a really nice forest look, just like the second branch. That's because I collected them in the forest. The third branch too. If you collect materials in the forest like this fourth branch here, please do so responsibly. We want to use the fifth branch to replicate nature and not to damage it. The same goes for this root. I gathered a variety of items to have creative options. I'm excited to see how I'll use this forked piece, for example. I also have a few stones in different shapes that I think will fit well in the vivarium. Not too big and not too small. For the plants, I chose this small fern, Actinopteris australis. To me, ferns are classic forest plants, and this one stays small enough for our setup. Its small fronds resemble palm leaves and will look fantastic in the vivarium. I also selected Fittonia albivenis. This mosaic plant comes in various colors, and the red accents will be a real eye-catcher in the otherwise green and brown vivarium. This plant also stays small enough to be manageable, but the smallest plant in the vivarium is probably the Ficus scandens. This little climbing plant grows more slowly than other species and has beautiful leaves that resemble oak leaves. I have some specific plans for this one, and I hope it works out as I've imagined. When you think of a forest, you can't ignore bark. And I got several pieces of cork to experiment with. This tube, for example, could represent a mini tree trunk, or perhaps a hiding spot for the ants. I'm trying to use exclusively natural materials, which means I can control how the cork grows. So we'll have to try things out and see what fits and what doesn't. But what's also made of natural material is this prefabricated nest. It's also made of cork and has pre-made tunnels and chambers. The ants love wood and will be able to nest wherever they want. And I want to offer this as a special feature in the vivarium. I have an awesome idea for it together with this piece of bark. I made the bark flexible with hot steam and then let it dry while pressing it flat. A forest, of course, also needs pine needles and some leaf litter. You can also collect these outside, and together with these small pine cones, they will hopefully complete the picture. Small accents can also be added with more stones. And for the highlights, I have a smaller selection here that you can use to create wonderful details. For the next layer in our vivarium, I'm using a mix of forest floor substrate. I'm adding an equal amount of rainforest soil to it. This has more humus than the forest soil, and I hope it will help retain moisture and the vivarium longer. I'm mixing it all in a large bowl, but the soil isn't complete without a few pieces of bark to get that real forest feeling. I'm mixing these roughly by eye. Lastly, I'm adding activated charcoal. This helps regulate moisture and also has detoxifying properties, removing impurities and toxins from the soil. I'm also mixing this in by eye until I feel I have enough and it's well distributed. I'm moistening the whole thing a bit so the plants feel at home and the soil is easy to shape. With a clear vision in mind, I carefully add the soil to the vivarium. I press the soil down a bit in between to make it firmer. That way, if the ants dig tunnels, they won't collapse as easily. And here I get the bark to test how high the soil needs to be. This nest is meant to represent the inside of a tree trunk. To do that, I need to test how high the nest should fit and fill the vivarium accordingly. Once the nest has its place, I press the cut bark into the soil to give it a stable base. It's important that the bark sits tightly against the nest to prevent the ants from nesting in the gap between the bark and the cork nest. They can excavate the soil I'm filling into the gaps, but I want to increase the likelihood that they use the nest so we can observe them well in a natural setup. On the side, both the nest and my bark panel have a little space to allow them to expand when they get damp. For aesthetics, I'm filling this with soil as well. Then I fill the other side with soil and we continue. This is what it looks like from the back. Enough space below for plants to grow and for ants to dig tunnels. From the front, you can already roughly see how it's supposed to look like a tree trunk. The small slope is great for placing everything else visibly and also resembles the base of trees you see in the forest. As I was examining the branches to add to the vivarium, I found a few ants that probably belong to the Camponotus genus. They often live in acorns and an entire colony can fit inside a single one. They must have hitched a ride with the branches and were a little surprised. I experimented a bit with the placement of the branches, arranging them to represent the root system of a tree. This fits my idea really well and would not only look great but also give the ants even more of the wood they love so much. Above all, the roots created this way allow us to add multiple levels to the vivarium, giving the whole thing a little bit more dynamic. Now we can plant the fern, whose roots I've exposed. I placed it right next to the tree root, making sure it had good contact with the soil. I did the same with the mosaic plant, creating a counterbalance to the green fern. Once it was properly seated, I turned my attention to the climbing plant. And look at how I'm placing it here. The idea is that it will climb along the branch and eventually up the tree trunk. That would be very cool and I hope it works. But the other branches shooting in different directions will surely be interesting too. I love how everything is coming together and creating a great atmosphere overall. Together with the branches, the plants form a unit that looks more and more like a forest. But of course, something very important is still missing. No forest is complete without moss. I also collected this directly from nature, so I can tell you exactly what or how many species of moss are represented here. You can also find other small plants and maybe even animals in it. You have to be aware that with wild-grown plants, you run the risk of introducing organisms you don't want in your vivarium, like parasitic mites for example. I'm taking the risk here to get closer and closer to a truly natural setup. If you want to be safer, you can, for example, carefully heat branches and stones in the oven for a while to stop any potential unwanted inhabitants. And remember to be responsible when collecting moss too. If you want to be completely safe, you can also buy moss. Once the moss was placed, I could add the stones and more decorations. A small branch also rounds off the picture. Then I tried a few placements for larger pine cones, which I also got from the forest, and a few more stones. Then a few mini cones here and there to create more highlights for the eye. Then a bit more moss for balance, because what's the forest without moss? We are using the small stones to create a kind of gravel path between the roots. The moss won't root there, and it will guide the eye wonderfully through the vivarium along the moss-framed roots to the tree trunk. And don't forget the pine needles. I quickly learned that you shouldn't have too many of them in such a limited setup and removed some again. A few are okay, but they should be delicate details. Now we still have the problem of what to do with the treetop. I experimented with branches, but they didn't look good. So I decided to fill this area with soil as well and use moss. Time will tell if the area can retain enough moisture so the moss doesn't dry out. It was worth a try though, and if it doesn't work out, it can be easily changed. And this is the final result. I think it's really beautiful. It's as if a small block was taken directly from nature and put in the box. The plants harmonize, the concept worked out completely, and I think you can see how I've learned from my previous vivariums. I can't wait to see the ants explore and discover in here. They will find everything in here that they would find in the wild, and you can hardly get any closer to nature. I'm quite proud and already feel like starting the next vivarium. They currently have a rainforest vivarium, a desert vivarium, and now a forest vivarium. What kind of vivarium would you like to see next? Let me know in the comments. But no vivarium is complete without the cleanup crew. These are tropical springtails, and they feed on plant debris and mold, so they ensure that everything we don't want is neutralized and added back into the cycle. They are too small to be hunted by the ants, and the population automatically adjusts to the amount of available food. I gave everything a little shower with distilled water so the springtails and plants would feel comfortable, and I gave it all one day to settle. In the meantime, let me introduce you to today's protagonist, the Camponotus ligniperda. Well, this looks a bit unsightly. It's a sad piece of cork, aluminum foil, and while the ants are truly fabulous to watch, they lose some of their charm through the milky plastic wall. It's also interesting how they use the remains of previous feedings to seal their nest. Ants do this to control humidity, for example, and to protect themselves from intruders. But let's look directly into the nest. Absolutely stunning, right? Sure, the ants are huge, but so are the pupae, which immediately catch the eye. The ants can grow up to 60 millimeters and are very great in size. A few ants always guard the entrance, and the colony is much larger than you would expect from the outside. But this also allows us to transport the largest part of a colony from A to B very easily. But before we put the colony in the vivarium, let's take a closer look at them. Here you can see the beautiful queen of a colony. Some of you may remember that I previously introduced this colony as Camponotus herculeanus, but users on the German ant Discord correctly pointed out that the red ring is a clear sign of ligniperda, as Herculeanus doesn't have it, and our queen has been very busy laying eggs. The colony is now in its 3rd year, and I expected it to explode this year. And looking at this pile of pupae, I have no doubt about that. The workers are also not pleased that the exit is blocked, but we'll take another moment. Look at how these ants share their food through a process called trophallaxis. Absolutely fascinating. And do you see this huge larvae? When it becomes an ant, it will probably be the largest worker to inhabit the colony so far. And not just the colony, but also this wonderful vivarium. For the escape barrier, we'll place some paraffin oil on the upper rim. The ants can get a grip on this. This way, we can open the lid and feed the ants without immediately having the room full of them. For the ants to see the nest as an option, we still need to darken it. We'll do this with red foil. We can see through it, but it's believed that ants can't see red light. So for the ants, it's dark in the nest while we can continue to observe them. A little bit of tape is enough to secure the foil, and with that, nothing stands in our way. This is the moment of truth, and always the most exciting one for me. I carefully place the test tube in the vivarium. These ants have formic acid, and if they panic, they can spray it inside the tube, where they can't escape the acid themselves and might get injured. So I'm glad they remain calm. Now it's time to say goodbye again. This might be the last time we see the queen. There's no guarantee that she will choose the prefabricated nest. And as they sometimes do in nature, the colony could also dig into the soil, as they sometimes do in nature. But there was nothing else we could do. So we remove the cotton and watch what happens. The first ants streamed out of the tube before the cotton was even completely removed. The large ants seemed surprised by the new environment, but also confidently set off to explore. The way all their antennae wiggle excitedly shows how all the information about the new environment is being eagerly absorbed. I also caught myself watching in fascination as the ants explored all the elements of the vivarium and how they reacted to them. It didn't take long for the first ants to climb the tree trunk. This was just as I had imagined it and reminded me strongly of the observations I had made myself in the forest. I was also very relieved to see that the escape barrier was working and holding the ants back. The ants didn't stop at the different areas of the vivarium, and at least half the colony was out and about. Due to the smaller size of the vivarium, it seemed to be the perfect size to observe the ants without being too small. I will have to enlarge this vivarium as soon as the colony starts to explode, but all in due time. I watched eagerly as an ant repeatedly approached the nest entrance and finally disappeared inside. Now she will explore the nest and hopefully give the colony the signal that there is a safe place for them there. After all, she is currently sitting in open daylight. The ants are safe, but they don't know that, a phenomenon that has been shown time and again in other vivariums. I wondered what was going through her mind. After all, this was the environment where they feel most comfortable, and from their old setup, this vivarium is a 1000% improvement in quality of life. A look into the nest also gives us a reason for optimism. Several ants were exploring it and showing interest. Ants first measure potential nest sites and then decide more or less democratically whether a nest is accepted. And if I had a view like that, I wouldn't say no to this ant villa. I also saw ants working on the cork bark. This surprised me a bit because there were so many other things to do here. But I wouldn't claim that I never procrastinated and prefer to do what I feel like doing. Who knows? Maybe they are trying to place their new nest here. In the colony, however, everything still seemed calm. Many were out and about, but the pupae and eggs were safely guarded and still placed at the upper end of the tube. It was incredible to see, when you look at the overview, how there was an ant in every corner gathering information. Thousands of smells and sensations were streaming back and forth here and savored every single second for the ants in this new setup. More and more ants seemed to be making their up the tree trunk to the nest, and a look inside the nest confirms this. There was a lot going on here for such a small opening, so this can't be a coincidence. And it was nice to see how the ants were apparently attracted to these chambers. After all, it is a nest that is supposed to recreate their natural nesting needs and takes their love for wood into account. Now, we still have to reunite the few ants that were left behind in the old setup with the colony and let them also enjoy the new vivarium. But that was quite tricky, because these ants are so fast and I didn't want to accidentally hurt them. In the meantime, the ants have continued to work on the cork bark, and you can even see small cork crumbs on the ground. Someone has given themselves a task here and is determined to see it through. Although the rest of the colony prefers the finished nest, you have to respect that somehow. And I could hardly get enough of watching these ants enter and leave the nest. After all, that was exactly the plan, or rather the hope. and it so beautifully depicts how the colony lives in a tree trunk in nature that I can hardly believe how well this is working. And out of nowhere, there was suddenly an ant with a pupae in its mandibles out in the open. She still seemed a bit disoriented, but then the direction was suddenly clear, and I could watch as the first pupae found its way into the nest. That was incredible. You can hardly imagine how relieved and excited I was to observe that. This was now the final confirmation that the colony was beginning to move, and the starting signal for one of the most interesting processes in the ant world. Now it was only a matter of time until the next pupae followed, and finally the queen. Whether the queen can climb up the tree trunk is also a concern of mine, but we'll see about that. But you could also see that the inside of the colony was now stirred up. You could see that something was happening here, and the queen was at the center of the excitement. Then I noticed this strange tug of war between the worker ants, and I hadn't expected to see something here that I had already observed in my Formica fusca colony. The ant lifted the other ant, which curled up and carried it into the new nest. I knew this behavior, which ants show to speed up a move, but it was new to me for this species. But it's also kind of cute to be carried piggyback. The ants also began to clear the entrance of a nest of things. This means they are making more space for passage. This usually means that something large has to get through, and the largest thing we have here is the queen. I took my time and followed a single ant across the vivarium, and was once again speechless at the beauty and elegance of these animals. They are also among the largest ants in Europe, and definitely the largest ants I keep. And a few of these ants have apparently decided that digging is definitely required here under this root. As I mentioned, the ants not only live in wood, but also in soil, and our soil here is excellent for digging. Even I had fun shaping this vivarium with it. Had the ants perhaps not chosen the new nest after all and preferred another option with the cork nibbling on the side and this new tunnel here? We now got probably 3 nest options, and it remained exciting. Because one thing was certain, the ants wanted to move, and we will accompany them. To capture how the ants decide and to observe where the colony finally moves to, I set up my time-lapse setup, and I also filmed everything. I was about to let the ants do their thing, but I just saw how the second pupae was now also making its way out of the tube. And this one also went directly into the prefabricated nest, so we are sticking with this option for now. And the second ant was carried piggyback up the trunk and was taken directly into the new nest, only to be followed by the third pupae without wasting a second. And even the fourth pupae was hot on its wheels. I don't think this will take as long as I assumed. In parallel, a lot of ants have become quite fixated on this corner here. I'm not sure what's happening here, but they seem to have a mission, and I won't stop them. More pupae and now even eggs continued to leave the old nest and took a small detour, but eventually found their destination. The corner has calmed down again, and I'm a bit puzzled as to what caused the excitement there. Now the excitement is probably back in the nest, and the queen seems to be stimulated by the transport of the pupae to move closer and closer to the exit. And do you see how this ant is pulling the queen here? Now it's getting serious. She's too heavy for piggyback, but she's clearly supposed to be moved. She was able to break free and was apparently not yet convinced, but stayed at the entrance. After a little while, she got 6 cold feet and retreated back into the safe areas of the glass. Finally, the queen ventured to the edge again, and she didn't seem sure this time either, but just as I was doubting her, she was suddenly on the move and couldn't be stopped, only to turn back and immediately and apparently be denied access to the nest by the workers. She seemed to have no orientation, however, and wandered around hopelessly. Again and again, I had the feeling that the direction was right, but my goodness, she made it exciting. I can only imagine the workers seeing the queen in the open and thinking what she's doing out here when she should be anywhere but there. She sought shelter in the darkness under the test tube, and she deserved it. Maybe she'll find peace and orientation there. Workers seemed to want to help her and pulled her again by the mandibles towards the new nest, but were unsuccessful. Finally, the journey ended where it began, and the queen was back where she started. All the excitement for nothing. But the ants were back in the corner and digging happily. And not only that, another entrance is being dug. And at this point, I'm not even sure which spot to keep an eye on, because something is happening everywhere. But the queen, who was on tour again, had a special focus, and again she had made her way to the small stone path under the tube. But this time it's going to be different. An ant encouraged her to crawl further, and now it seemed as if all her doubts had vanished. I wondered if she could climb the trunk, and it was close, but in record time the queen reached the treetop and was greeted by the warmth of a new home. I was cheering inside, and it's always difficult to keep the camera still in moments like these. It was finally done, and the queen has moved. The rest of the colony will follow. There's nothing left for us to do but wait and check the result the next day. And what awaits us here is a mystery, and I will solve it for you. Early morning fog enveloped our forest, and a light breeze reveals what is hidden in the mystery. The nest tube is gone, and what remains is a forest, a colony, and a vivarium. Beautiful, active, and absolutely stunning. Having such a small piece of forest right in your home is really special. The morning dew still lies on the leaves and moss, and the ants were hard at work shaping the environment to their will. Ants were everywhere, and their brown-red bodies were sprinkled all over the vivarium, and the look into the nest was just as impressive. The ants had piled up the pupae in one chamber, and for a moment I allowed myself to remove the foil and get a closer look. The ants were represented everywhere, and how the pupae were placed was really interesting. It looks exactly how you would imagine the inside of a colony. The queen was actually found hanging on the side instead of standing flat on the ground, and was probably well cared for. But I actually expected many more ants here in the nest. But when you consider how many ants are still out and about in the foraging area, that's not really surprising. But I have a real surprise for you here, because this acorn houses something very special, and with a little bit of finesse I can also show you what. Very carefully I remove the shell, and you can already see what this probably is. Do you remember when I told you that one acorn can house an entire colony of Camponotus ants? This is one of these colonies. These tiny ants are only a few millimeters large, yellow, and are also inhabitants of our vivarium. Do you see all these larvae and eggs? This colony is alive, active, and loves the forest no less than our Camponotus ligniperda. And it didn't take long for our giants to discover the acorn, unsuspecting of what was hidden inside. And it didn't take long for the first workers to go on an exploratory tour, just as the ligniperda did. Only for this species, everything is even more gigantic, and in theory, you can keep these two ant species together. Due to the small size, it's difficult for me to determine which Camponotus species this is, but they should be peaceful, avoid conflicts, and be uninteresting for the ligniperda. At least that's the theory. If that's really true, remains to be seen. And as soon as the news of a new environment reached the colony, the rest also ventured outside. And seeing them swarm on the acorn was as cute as it was fascinating. Now all that's missing is the welcome gift, as we did with the last vivariums. This time an Argentine wood cockroach. The Camponotus ligniperda have certainly earned this, and the Camponotus will also be happy about this snack. I hope one species doesn't fight the other for the food and preventing them from eating. There should be plenty of everything, but Ligniperda could be dominant if they wanted to. The Ligniperda was also the first of a cockroach and helped itself to a snake. With a full stomach, you're probably less aggressive, so maybe it increases the chance of a peaceful coexistence. But how that turns out and whether we may have triggered an ant war, you'll find out in a future episode. Until then, ciao.